And coming up on this week's Green Signals, Network Rail Chief Executive Sir Andrew Haines describes the Rail Enhancement Pipeline as a flawed proposition because it is owned politically and is not a strategy for the railway. Is he right? You can now apply to become a train driver at 18, but will it solve the shortage of drivers? And it's been reported that Network Rail spends £10,000 a week on internal flights. But is it true? So welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Jolly good. Beautiful day, Richard. Let's dive straight in. Last week we had a shorter show than usual thanks to an especially busy filming schedule in various places around the country. As a result, a number of people commented that the show was a bit too short. Well, Richard, I have never been accused in the past of not talking enough.
No, me neither, in fairness, so right.
Anyway, we have a packed show this week and we intend to make up for it, so buckle up. Right, let's jump in with an extraordinary session, and I use the word advisedly, at the Transport Select Committee on investment pipelines and whether our railway suffers from so-called boom and bust. It was extraordinary because of some of the things that were said, none of which got picked up by the mainstream media, but we've picked them up for you. Richard, you're our TSC guru. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this was, as you say, it was an oral evidence gathering session, oral, obviously just in public with witnesses present, as part of their inquiry called Rail Investment Pipelines Ending Boom and Bust. Now, there were two panels, separate panels in this session. The first was Network Rail. We had the Chief Executive, Andrew Haines, and the Chief Financial Officer, Jeremy Westlake. So they got about half the time. And then there was a short break, and then there was a second panel, which had Rail Forum. We had the Vice Chair, Michelle Craven-Faulkner, and the Chief Executive, Elaine Clark. And they were joined by the Railway Industry Association. So we had Noel Travers, who's the Chair, and Robert Cook, who's the Policy Director. And as usual, Network, they fired questions at the witnesses. And because the first bit was with Network Rail and Andrew Haines, and I thought, it could be one of his last appearances in front of the Transport Select Committee, I did wonder if he might be a little DMOB happy, and he did not disappoint.
Excellent stuff. And if I might say so, Richard, having seen the comments, I think you're just guilty of understatement there. We've done our usual approach of highlighting a few key sections for everyone to hear and for us to discuss. Remember, when taking selected highlights, there's always a risk of missing a bit of context either side. So we'll put a link on our website to the full hearing so you can soak up the whole thing as Richard does. Take it away.
Okay, so the first segment we're going to just have here is setting the scene. And the chair of the committee, Ruth Cadbury MP, asked about the term boom and bust.
Okay, so why does the rail industry describe the approach to rail investment in this country as one of boom and bust?
It's not a term I would use,
Okay.
but I think what is absolutely true is that the commitment of big programs like HS2 are very, very significant. We're probably spending more money on enhancements in our network than we've done for 100 years in real terms. Typically about £7 billion a year on HS2 at the moment, around about £1 billion a year on Transpine and route upgrade for the next 6 or 7 years. If East West Rail proceeds as it's planned, about £500 million on that. So if you're in those projects, you're part of the boom. Yeah. But if you're not in those projects, then the pipeline of funding available for other projects is much more reduced. And then the second thing I would say is because inflation has eaten into the value of our renewal settlement, so our regulatory settlement, although still a very good discipline, has been eroded by the impact of inflation.
Okay. Now, one of the big points Andrew made a number of times at the committee was the difference between operations maintenance and renewals, which is kind of one bucket, OMAR, and enhancement, right? And especially, he made the point on quite a few occasions that decisions on enhancements and the funding that goes to support them is now a matter for the Department for Transport, not Network Rail. So here's Lawrence Turner MP, who began by asking about the arm's length nature of GBR, Great British Railways in the future, and Andrew talked about that separation between OMR and enhancements.
One of the issues that we're interested in as a committee is the future arm's length relationship of shadow GBR and what that would look like in practice. So thinking about the experience of Network Rail and looking back over the last 10 years, there does seem to have been occasions where the political timetable has overlapped with the control period timetable in some uncomfortable ways. So the delays to Great Western and Midland Main Line electrification, for example, were only disclosed immediately after the 2015 election. The current government says that there was a significant funding gap on some transport projects. Have you ever been under pressure, or the organisation been under pressure in your time to announce certain projects before time, or to withhold information from disclosure in respect of political pressure?
That's quite an easy one for me. No, I'm not, but that's partly, I guess, because I arrived just as the separation of renewals and enhancement funding had taken place. And so from the 1st of April 2019, enhancement funding was directly controlled and released by the government. So those decisions are in any case matters for government and not for us as Network Rail. It's what is absolutely true that in the 5 years prior to that, what we saw was renewals and, if you like, maintaining the core railway was cut back because of the increasing cost of some of those big schemes like Great Western electrification. Because prior to that 2019 point, it was there was an overall spending cap for both enhancements and renewals. So there were definitely some trade-offs having to be made there, but I've never had that pressure because those decisions are not Network Rail's decisions to take.
Okay.
Enhancement policy is absolutely key, clearly, isn't it? And that's indicated by the fact there has been huge growth in civil servants because they're the clients for this work now, not Network Rail.
Yeah, they're very much the sponsor of these things. And that even gets more complicated now when you look at some of the stuff's happening around the country. So, for instance, all the work that's going on in the Midlands Rail Hub, West Midlands Combined Authority, very heavily involved in sponsoring that along with the department. Northumberland Line, we talked about that many times. Northumberland County Council, or Northumbria County Council, very much sort of in the lead on that. And actually Network Rail have played a sort of, a supporting role. The sponsorship for enhancements sits somewhere else. And I think we'll see more of that as, devolution comes. There is a really interesting point about this, though, which is maybe actually, if what we all want is a predictable, safe, boring, reliable railway, it's actually better that Network Rail now and GBR in the future do focus.
Of course it is.
On that OMR.
And it's interesting, and I believe significant, what you pointed out in the last comments about Andrew made the point several times about DFT being responsible, and shame on the mainstream media for not picking up the hint there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And have been since the 1st of April 2019, which is about when he actually came to the organisation. Yeah. So he's kind of never run Network Rail without this position being in place. Then it got really interesting. So then Steph Aquarone, who's the MP for North Norfolk, Lib Dem MP for North Norfolk, asked about how Network Rail liaise with their supply chain to give them advance notice of what's coming in terms of spend. And Andrew's comments on inflation were pretty dramatic.
When it comes to the pipeline, though, and one of the bigger themes of this inquiry, which is around industry readiness and the view that industry has of what's coming down the tracks, that's inadvertent pun, can you tell us a bit about how you liaise with the supply chain as part of the control period process? How much visibility they have, how much planning and preparation, and perhaps also how that compares to the way in which you engage with the supply chain for centrally funded bigger projects, improvements, enhancements, that sort of stuff?
Well, I think ideally the supply chain want sight of the total pipeline because some of our renewals activity on track, it's big. There's very heavy plant or signaling. You're looking for technology investment, and so they sometimes don't distinguish as much between renewals and enhancement. So they really want to see the end to end. Why? Well, because they want to plan their workforce. We want them to invest in technology, which means they need to comfort that there's going to be a return on that investment because there's going to be a work stream to do it. Historically, we've not been very good at transitioning from one control period to the next. And because contracts were brought to an end at the end of year 5, as if there was never going to be any money for year 1. We've done rather better than that for the most recent control period. We've just started year 2. If I give you an illustration of that, we spent something like 19.2% of our 5-year settlement in the first year. So obviously if it was perfectly flat, it'd be 20%. Yeah. We were only 0.8 away from that. So in terms of that visibility, we've been fine. Where the supply chain have been really concerned is that 19.2% hasn't gone as far as it has in previous years because we've seen very significant increases in inflation. Ballast, the rocks, if you like, the track is laid on, that's gone up by 80% since 2018. Concrete sleepers have gone up by 75% since 2019. Signalling costs have gone up by about 400 million over the last control period. So although we've given visibility of the work, it's not crystallising into as many orders as the supply chain want to have. And I think that's where we've not been good enough this time, is giving them is translating what money means in terms of orders. We've contracted more of the work, but it's been fewer contracts than I think many of the suppliers were expecting. So where they're finding that they've now got grief, in some cases talking about workforce redundancies, it's not because we haven't smoothed the flow, it's because the value of the settlement has been reduced by what we know are 2 or 3 years of abnormal inflation.
Understand that.
Well, the inflation point's well made, Richard. We've all felt it in our pockets, but I have to say I was gobsmacked at the extent of some of the massive increases in some real basic stuff for Network Rail, concrete sleepers, ballast. They go through massive amounts of that. So the money's just not going to go as far, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge increases, 80%, 70%, signalling costs going up massively. What was interesting also, though, was Andrew, I suppose put a bit of a gloss on it and said, moving from one control period to another is always a little bit kind of fraught because it kind of winds down a bit and then picks up a bit, no matter how hard you try. And that's fair enough. So CP6, which was the last one, finished in March 24, and then CP7 took off from April 24, right? So we've just had the first year of it. And he said, look, if you think about it, 5-year settlement, you should spend 20% a year. We've spent 19.2%. So, aren't we? Isn't that good?
And I'm not always convinced by that point about it was better than last time. If a train operator went from 40% to 70% improvement in performance, it's a really big improve, but it's still poor.
It's still poor. No, and that's fair. But, nonetheless, there's no question that the forces at work here and impacting Network Rail are very, very significant. Okay, let's move on to the next segment. It's by far my favourite, right? Ollie Glover, who's the Lib Dem MP for Didcot and Wantage, is great. He always asks really punchy questions. There's no grandstanding. There's no my constituency this or mine. It just basically bang, right? And he did the same here. But I bet he wasn't expecting the answer he got back from Andrew.
I don't think any of us were.
Why has the Rail Network Enhancements Pipeline not been updated since 2019?
Well, at the risk of being controversial, I think because it's a flawed proposition, by which I mean the fact that it's owned politically and is therefore subject to shifting political priorities. It's not a strategy for the railway. And so what we see is, particularly at a time when there's more and more demand for things, a new politician will come in with wanting to do something new,
to suggest.
Ms Smith mentioned restoring your railways, for example, and that just gets added to the list, but nobody wants to take anything off. So very quickly the numbers don't add up, and the easiest way to not expose that is to not publish the pipeline. That's about as straight as I can be.
No, that's very clear, very clear. So could I infer from your comments that you would really like to see a clear strategy for the railway from government and giving clear direction as to what it wants to achieve, strategically, not just in terms of, pet projects, or far be it for me to suggest any pork barrel project.
I very passionately believe that the railway is very good at doing certain things. I also am utterly convinced it's not the answer to every problem. And I think being very clear on what the railway is best at doing and having a prioritised list of interventions, be they rolling stock, be they additional staffing, be they technology, be they physical infrastructure. You don't have to commit all the funding to them. The pace at which you roll them out is obviously subject to broader political priorities. But being clear on where the railway adds most value and prioritising that list, I think would actually be better value for the taxpayer. I think we would deliver a better railway as a result, and the supply chain would have more confidence in the pipeline.
Well, there's the truth of it, laid out for Andrew, and again, shame on the MSM for not picking it up. But it was Grayling who came up, I think, with the enhancement pipeline because he'd been paralysed with fear with a GWEP soaring to 2.8 billion. And he was supposed to report every year, and they got their hands around it and they control it, and it is nothing to do with Network Rail.
I mean, some of the lines in there, it's a flawed proposition. Yeah, of course it is.
Politically controlled.
Politically controlled. I love that line about, another politician comes up with their latest wish list that they want to add to a project they want to add to the wish list.
Stick it in there.
Because that's all it is. Nobody ever takes anything out. And you end up with, and I thought that line about, so the best thing to do is just not to publish it at all, was brilliant. There's a man who is probably a bit closer to retirement than perhaps he would have been previously. He doesn't really care.
He'd never have said that before. What was the expression you used earlier? D-mob happy.
Yes.
I'd urge sort of viewers to scroll back and watch Andrew delivering that. And his parting shot through that little secret smile saying, "It's as honest as I can be."
Yeah, this is as straight as I can be, yeah. But he's absolutely correct.
Right.
Okay. And that's the issue with these enhancements. The real problem here is that when they become as politically controlled as they now are, and are going to be for the rest of recorded time, by the way, with devolution to mayoral bodies and combined authorities and all the rest of it, you will end up with a concatenation of things that everybody thinks is a good idea at a local level, but they're not a strategy. And, one of the things we did 20 years ago at the SRA, I'm not saying we were marvellous, but it's not like anything's new. We actually said, look, the railway is good at certain things, and it's quite lousy at others. It's really good at intercity high-speed services. It's really good at high-frequency urban services. It's really good at airport links, and it's really good at homogenous freight services. But it's not good at a train trundling between, I don't know, Beverley and York or wherever it is they want to reopen.
Careful what you say.
And that is but it's really important, Nigel, that in the future, the government say, this is what we want from the railway. This is what we want.
But that example you gave, that local example, is going to become more controversial as we get more devolution and more mayors wanting to put the finger in the pie and improve exactly that kind of thing.
And maybe that's why GBR's kind of best out of it and actually said, you know what, we're going to focus on operations maintenance renewals. If you want to do enhancements, we'll help, we'll support, we'll work with our stakeholders, but you're funding it, you're deciding it, and you can fight over it.
What about little incremental enhancements that are small but deliver really big benefits, especially if you can link them with OMR, because you got Platform 4 at Swindon put back, large result of as your own agitation. What happens there with them now, especially in the era where a station cost 20 million quid?
So that was a point that Andrew and the Chief Financial Officer, Jeremy Westlake, made a couple of times, that actually you can't say that operations maintenance and particularly renewals and enhancements are completely devoid of, they never touch each other. Of course they do. So if you go in and do, a bit of platform resurfacing, that might be the sensible moment to do a bit of enhancement as well, right? So there is an issue around coordination, which is absolutely vital. You'll get a better deal for everybody. So of course there's got to be coordination, and of course they've got to integrate, and everyone's got to talk to each other.
Maybe
and
that will come back.
Yeah, and well, I hope so, because Network Rail and GBR in the future. I mean, Swindon Platform 4 wasn't particularly inspired. It was just, I mean, can you imagine that at Swindon, every train going in the down direction, so from London to Bristol, had to cross over the up fast to call at Swindon, right?
And then back again.
Right? Absolutely mauled capacity. And putting that platform in, which had been there and BR had taken it out in the 80s, solve that problem. There will be plenty of little examples like that. I think overall he was very good, right? Apologies actually to Jeremy Westlake, the CFO, because he was also very good as well. And we haven't included him on those clips, but he was very measured and spoke a lot of sense. Then we had the second session, right? Now, we've just got one segment here, and it's when RIA, the Railway Industry Association, were asked if they agreed with the statement about boom and bust. Did they believe actually we do have boom and bust? And this is what Noel Travers, who's the chair, said first, and then we had Robert Cook, who's the policy director.
I think Sir Andrew characterised it with a contraction initially and then periods of... I don't agree with him in that there hasn't been boom and bust. There absolutely has been boom and bust across the piece. But what we're experiencing at the moment is way beyond anything I've experienced in my career. And that's down to a number of factors. It's down to the rail reform programme, the bringing on Great British Railway and the impact that has on those that may be affected around that. It is down to the start to CP7 being particularly difficult, which has actually been caused by the end of CP6 being also particularly difficult. And also the devolution within Network Rail to the routes and regions has created a degree of uncertainty. And for clarity, I completely agree that rail reform is right and the devolution is right. But what hasn't been considered is the impact that those things have had on the industry's ability to spend its money effectively and efficiently.
Thank you. Robert?
I would agree with all of that. And to just build on it, I've brought 3 charts along for the committee. We have a sort of long-term trend of Network Rail renewals, which is since privatisation through to the current control period. You can see sort of significant spikes as we go through that. On rolling stock, this goes back to 1988 up to 2024, and you can see the volumes of investment across years fluctuating very widely. And finally, on electrification, the green bars show the UK electrification volumes. And you can see the drought that Sir Andrew referred to. The red line reflects German levels of electrification over a similar 30-year period, which they delivered for significantly lower cost. So the point I would stress is that we've had this, it has been for a number of years, we have it across lots of different asset types, and as others have said, it's been particularly acute recently for reasons that we could get into.
Now, that does sound rather as if it's a very different perspective than the one Andrew portrayed. And so to get a bit more insight, Richard followed up, bless him, and spoke to Robert Cook himself, Policy Director of RIA, to understand a bit more of the detail, which is where God and the devil always lurk.
Robert, welcome to Green Signals. The Transport Select Committee, which you gave evidence at, along with Noel and the folks from Rail Forum, I came away a little bit confused still as to whether there was an issue in terms of CP67 or whether actually there wasn't. And is it possible to drill down into a bit more detail, you think, and say, right, what actually happened from leaving CP6 to going into CP7?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think that's definitely worth doing because it is quite confusing. And there's a few different factors. There's probably three big factors to sort of disentangle. And then the question is, what do those mean cumulatively? So the first of those, I think, the last year of the control period 6, we saw double-digit inflation eat through Network Rail's budgets really fast. And clearly, a lot of that's down to world events, COVID and Ukraine situation. But effectively, it means less work was delivered for the same money. And that's across both renewals and maintenance. So work that suppliers were then expecting to see confirmed with what would have been the extra budgets available just never materialised. Now, it's difficult to give an exact value of that, but the best proxy I'm aware of is that the Office of Rail and Road has this metric called the Financial Performance Measure, and it publishes it every year. And what they've said is that Network Rail had an underperformance, financial performance in that last year of control period 6 of about £900 million. So take that as a rough reckoner for the sort of the shortfall in funding. And the really important thing about this factor is it meant that there was no extra money to make up for that work then in the CP7 settlement. So there was a hangover of work from the end of CP6 into CP7, but without the extra money to catch it up. So that's really that first factor. So the second big factor, I think, is just to recognise that there are a lot of extra spending pressures in control period 7, which we haven't seen at the same scale previously. So there's climate change and resilience, which I'll come to in a minute, which is really significant. But utility spend, the cost of electricity has roughly doubled in the last 10 years, and we're seeing about 350 million to 730 million of expenditure. Wow. That's the sort of uplift that we've seen over that period of time.
Is that mainly electricity?
Yeah. That will be the Network Rail spends a lot of money on electricity to run its network. So that's a big factor. Then you've got, of course, all of the unit cost inflation that you'll see through the normal rest of the construction industry in the UK, materials and labour that will affect the rest of business. It affects Network Rail's work as well as supplier spend. And then you've got other smaller factors like national insurance, which was unexpected at the time of the settlement. And Network Rail has said that that's about 200 million cost impact. So you've got these extra spending pressures in control period 7, which take money away from, you would argue, the core business of running the railway renewals and maintenance. And then perhaps the third really big factor is that there've been some very significant swings in what work is planned to be spent for money to be spent on in control period 7. So the clearest way to think about this perhaps is the balance between renewal spending and maintenance spending. So if you look at the plans, it shows an 11% reduction in renewal spending in the different England and Wales regions and in Scotland. And conversely, you've got about a 7% increase in maintenance spending. But when you go down within those categories, if you sort of leaf through the detailed documents that were published by the ORR in the planning for the review, there are predictions of much more significant swings within categories for renewals. So most dramatically, I think this was at the draft determinations, so quite early stages, they were looking at a 28% reduction in track renewals, which is huge, but then a 22% increase in drainage. And this gets to the climate resilience factor. With a very sort of climate stressed railway, how do you allocate tight budgets? And there's been a clear reduction in the amount of renewals and an increase in the amount of maintenance and the types of renewals around climate resilience, so that's shifted the spend. So the punchline then across these three factors, that overhang from CP6, the extra spending pressures, and then swings in the type of work, those are the three. I think the consequence is that if you look at the sort of companies in our supply chain and the amount of money Network Rail's invoices goes to them, there's been about an 8% drop-off in that value of invoices through to the supply chain across the control period transition, and much bigger swings if you look within the categories of that. And I think the key thing is that caught a lot of companies by surprise, for better or worse, and it really highlights the importance of really strong communication across trade associations and Network Rail and companies, just to make sure we understand the situation and what's coming so we can plan accordingly.
And is that kind of the big takeaway, really? Because most of those things you've just outlined there, I mean, Andrew Haines really said, he talked about the cost of ballast, the cost of sleepers. He talked about the need to spend more on earthworks and therefore we're going to spend less on other things. So he did kind of cover those points. There was nothing, I didn't feel there was anything hidden there. But the issue here is just good communication, because presumably it's the impact on the supply chain is disproportionate. So signalling has done pretty well, or it will do pretty well in this control period because of digital signalling, which is great if you're one of the big signalling contractors, of which there aren't many. But if you're an SME working in, say, the track renewal space, this is pretty bad, isn't it? So how bad is it for some of these smaller entities who are going to see some real quite big reductions in work program?
You're quite right, as ever. And if you're running a business, it's about your ability to look ahead and plan for your workforce and investment in capital. Now, SMEs are much less capitalized than the big companies. They have smaller balance sheets. So that means when there's a swing in their work, they're much less financially resilient to be able to stand up to that. So clearly there's a risk there, and they're obviously really important for innovation and the health of the whole sector. The big players aren't immune from this too. I mean, on the specifics of signalling, that spend is yet to ramp up yet. And so there's a really key communication point about when is that going to happen, and making sure those companies can plan accordingly. I think the large companies, the two things we should be worrying about, there are redundancies from large companies. They're not immune from the pain. They may have the big balance sheets, but they're certainly having to make really difficult decisions at the moment. And that's a skills retention issue for the whole industry. We've got a lot of people with a lot of expertise, but many of them are nearing retirement. If they take redundancy, will we see them again, or will they go to other sectors? That's a risk. And the other is, of course, more widely around investor sentiment. If you're investors behind railway companies, do you go to UK Rail, International Rail instead, or other markets like energy or other utilities? So there are still those sort of macro choices. I think the importance here is that the national level status that we've seen a 9% reduction annually roughly in the workforce, and there's a couple of different sources that sort of back up that. That's clearly not sustainable. We think it is solvable, but we would need a really good long-term strategy to get there.
Makes total sense. Let's hope people are listening. Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
That was interesting, wasn't it? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, very, very good as ever, on top of the numbers, on top of the analysis. And I think the points that you drew out there were key. There was a big overhang between CP6 and CP7, a lot of it caused by inflation, and that's meant there's less money in CP7 than everybody thought. And the real worry here is, if we're not careful, I mean, some of these small, medium enterprises, these SMEs, they are going to lose sufficient amounts of work that they may not survive.
Yeah.
Right. And there are job losses. And you kind of go, well, that's sort of economic cycle. Yeah, but this is skill and it's experience. And if we learn nothing from electrification, it is that when you have big hiatus of not doing stuff, when you start to do again, it costs you an absolute fortune.
And we're effectively kicking the can down the road. We're storing up problems for the future at best. At worst, I am always nervous when I hear about deferral of track maintenance, and that word is Hatfield.
Yeah, and that's the concern, is you're kicking the can down the road, but not terribly far.
Absolutely. Well, we shall be watching that space and coming back to it, I am certain.
Indeed.
Thanks for doing the TSC work again, Richard. I know it's a big job, but I appreciate it, and I'm sure there's lots of other green signallers do. Right, last week, as we were recording, it was being announced that the age at which young people could learn to drive a train is being reduced to 18. We said we'd come back to this, and here we are, as it's newsworthy and something that ASLEF in particular has been lobbying for some time. Now, Britain has got around 27,000 train drivers, but 30% of them, fully a third, are due to retire within 5 years. That's some bow wave of departures coming. That means that not only is there a problem today, there is a bigger problem not far down the line. And there's no one fault or failure that's caused all this, Richard, but the problem is worse than it's been in the past.
I think so. And I think a lot of that is probably down to things that we've talked about on the show plenty of times before, like, rest day working, overtime reliance, and a lack of, or a sort of hiatus, there's that word again, in recruitment over, the last 5 to 10 years in some places. In the end, if the rate of retirement and the rate of recruitment don't match, in the end, you'll build up a problem, and that's kind of what we have done.
And training was very delayed as well, particularly during COVID, because ASLEF would only have one in the cab, and that added years to some training programs.
And then the introduction of new train fleets means that you lose quite a lot of drivers because you've got to put them through a training program to learn to drive new trains. So actually, if anything, when you're introducing new trains, you almost need to have more. So yeah, all of those are absolutely have been an issue.
And channeling my inner Andrew Haines, let us not just blame the private sector. Train companies have been nationally run by the DfT since COVID, since lockdown, March 2020. This is 2025. So the DfT has had 5 years to get off its proverbial and do something about this, and it hasn't.
Well, and the other thing with train drivers, actually, I suppose is true to an extent of all people who work in the rail industry, the pensions are quite generous.
They are.
So whereas in the wider economy, we're tending to retire later, the pensions for drivers means that's not really any value to them in doing that, right? So they do tend to retire when the model predicts they'll retire, if not a bit earlier. So it's not like this should have come as any surprise to anybody. So no.
Anyway, one concern that did surface in the media and on social media were the inevitable comments about whether an 18-year-old is mature enough or responsible enough to drive a train.
I read some of these social media comments, and I must admit, the phrase "they walk among us" sort of sprang to mind a couple of times. You just, some of the comments are like, have you seen them driving their cars when they're 18 around the local, you're just like, really?
And let us not forget that the training, well, no, not the training requirements, the acceptance requirements to even get on the training programme. As we said before, I did the Virgin West Coast as was, psychometric test, and it was the most difficult thing I think I've ever had to do. Maybe we should do a video at some point, Richard, about that sort of thing. But it will sift out the best people.
It does. That is such a key point, right? So, this is a permissive arrangement. You don't have to. All the train companies will approach this in whatever they think is the right manner. But you're dead right. So the process, the psychometric tests, the training itself, it's tough, it's arduous. Learning the rules, it is not, as we all know, a case of going out and pressing a load of buttons. It's really tough, and that was kind of my previous point. Really, it's not really about age. It's about your ability to get through the program, and it will sift out the ones that can't do it. As simple as that.
Just like the RAF's fighter pilots program, there's people who want to do it, don't get to. So what would motivate someone to want to become a train driver, and what's the reality compared with the expectation? Now, Bessie Matthews is a well-known personality within the railway family. She's a driver for GB Rail Freight and has led campaigns on all manner of subjects, including rail safety, and her significant talents as an artist led to her writing and illustrating an award-winning book aimed at teaching children about safety on the railways. It was incredibly successful. So Richard talked to Bessie about what had motivated her to become a train driver in the first place.
Bessie, welcome to Green Signals. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
What inspired you to become a train driver?
It was, first of all, seeing, you may have heard of Heather Waugh, fantastic woman, freight driver in Scotland. And it was seeing her advocation for the mental health of boys and men. And that's when I first heard of her. She was on BBC News, and it just piqued my interest. And it spiraled from there. I was thinking, oh, wow, she is brilliant. I'm going to look into it. Looked into it, started speaking to Heather. Now we're very good friends. But it was really that moment that I thought, my goodness, I can do it. Because it had been in my mind before. I've always wanted to work on the railway. Knew I wanted to start as a guard, and I did that in 2018. But driving was never really something that I felt like I could do. It's a lot of rules, and it's a lot of structure, and it's a lot of things that I think, I can't do that. But then seeing someone that I felt like I related to, that's what then planted the seed. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to do it.
And you qualified fairly recently, so you're now out there driving trains.
I'm out there driving trains.
Is the experience of it now what you thought it would be?
No, it's 100 times better. It is because you speak to people who don't know the railway, or maybe you speak to people that have never sat in the cab of a train and it's just sitting looking out of a window. And okay, yeah, on the surface of it, you're sitting looking out of a window, but the whole thing, you are in control of so much. You are so responsible for all these things, whatever's behind you, be it freight, be it people, and that feeling itself is incredible. You could be sat in a loop and it still feels great that like you're looking after all of this behind you, going along at whatever speed that you're doing, and the sunsets, the sunrises, the city landscapes, the deers running in the field, and it's just the whole thing is an experience in itself.
That's fantastic. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be in a cab a number of times, and I do get that, but the idea of being able to drive as well, that's a whole nother level. So no, that's brilliant to hear. One of the things that was interesting, I mean, only 9% or thereabouts of all the train drivers, I think we've got about 27,000 train drivers in Britain, only about 9% are women. And I suppose that's partly because there's this perception that it's, as you said earlier, oh, I'm not sure I could do that. You're one of those women in rail who've been brilliant at breaking down barriers. Have there been some real challenges becoming a woman train driver, and how have you overcome those?
Yeah, there's definitely been challenges. I think a lot of them have been internal. That's me, like when I first started on the railway, it's myself telling myself that I can't do it. And then because of that, I then tell other people that I can't do it. And then they take my first opinion of myself as face value. And then all of a sudden I can't do it. So that's one of the biggest challenges. A lot of people say, oh, the railway weren't built for women, or the railway wasn't really built for anyone other than the average human. So if you're shorter than average, it wasn't built for you, or if you're taller than average, or it's one of those things. So there are parts of the railway that have been challenging, but instead of going, oh, I can't do it, it's okay, let's have a look at how I can do it. So one thing, for example, personally for me, coupling and uncoupling wagons or engines to wagons. When I was training to do that, all of my counterparts, my male counterparts in my class with me, easily lift it over, throw it over, go on strong. I couldn't do it like that. I couldn't do it. And at first in my mind, I'm going, I can't do this. This job is not for me. Actually, no, I can do it because I can lift it in a different way to them, and then it's just as easy. And I don't have to think about it anymore.
And I suppose then that's our final question, really, which builds a bit upon that, Bessie, because it's not an easy job. It's not a 9-to-5 job. There can be some antisocial hours. It's technically quite challenging to learn. What advice would you give to an 18-year-old who's thinking about this as a possible career?
The first bit of advice is, if you're thinking about it, just do it. And then, because it's never straight away. So people might hear, 18-year-olds are now going to start driving trains. It's not going to be all of a sudden everyone's going to be 18. It's not straight away. The application process takes a long time. The recruitment process takes a long time. And then the tests leading up to interview take a long time. And then the whole class takes a long time. So first bit is, if you're thinking about it, go for it. And then while you're going for it, then you can have a look into what comes along with it. My second bit of advice is be patient. It's nice to nudge. You can always give a friendly nudge, like, hello, you haven't forgotten about me, have you? That's not an issue. But still, just be patient. If it's going to happen, it will happen. But in that same breath, if it's not completely, it's never going to be completely linear, but if it's not in a way that you're not feeling comfortable with, embrace other options. Have a look at other options. Have a look at other companies. Have a look at other locations. Have a look at so many different things.
Well, that's fantastic advice. Look, it's great to chat to you. You're obviously having a great time doing it. I see your social media posts from time to time. They're always positive. They're always uplifting. So, Bessie, thanks ever so much for coming on the show, and good luck with the next phase of your driving career.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The enthusiasm and it sort of always shines through. And the point she made there is right, isn't it? It's actually very hard.
It is, as we said.
But she also made the point that if you want it, go for it. And, you know, that's that. I thought that was also really important as well. But yeah, it is not a walk in the park to become a train
it's not.
driver.
And I've heard Bessie say this several times, which is one of the reasons why she's always keen to talk about it, particularly with regard to diversity and female drivers. And she said, Nigel, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And they can see me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, we made the point, this change to 18 is permissive. That means that, you know, train companies don't have to do it, and it will be horses for courses. It will be they'll apply it in different ways and it'll be appropriate. But, you know, it's an important and welcome change. It could, you know, as we were talking to Bessie about, it could improve the, you know, the sort of the diversity and of the, and I mean that in every sense, of the pool of potential drivers. But here's the problem, right? Today, there is no problem recruiting drivers. There are multiple applicants, and sometimes many, many applicants oversubscribed for every role. So dropping the age to 18 of itself might change the mix of applicants, and it might make it bigger, but it won't lead to more drivers unless there's funding in place to recruit and train. Okay, so we mentioned last week that we had another event to tell everybody about, and this one involves a party.
Yay!
Now, 2025, of course, is the year when we celebrate 200 years of the railway, and many, many events are planned up and down the country, and the list seems to just grow every day, which is brilliant. And obviously, the greatest gathering at Alstom, Derby in August is going to be one of the showcase events, but there are many, many others. Interesting, though, 2025 is also the 150th anniversary of the Railway Industry Association. We had Robert Cook on earlier. And on the 10th of July, they've got an event in London to mark that anniversary. Now, according to RIA, they say the Railway Industry Association is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year, coinciding with the 200th anniversary of rail in the UK. To honour these historic milestones, we are commemorating RIA's past, reflecting on the journey of rail with our RIA 150 network reception and after party. So it is an opportunity to meet and mingle with rail professionals, key stakeholders of the railway family. You don't have to be a railway industry person to attend. Anybody interested can buy a ticket. I'm planning to be there. I don't know about you, Nigel. You thinking about rocking up for this one? It's got a party. It's got a party.
Order my ticket when you order yours.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, look, we'll put a link on our website so you can see where to and how to buy tickets. If you have gold tier membership of Green Signals, you get a third off the price of the ticket as well, which is brilliant.
How about that?
That's fantastic, isn't it? It promises to be a really enjoyable and memorable event. So looking forward to that one.
Absolutely. We'll have to make sure we've got a Green Signals lapel badge each that day, won't we?
Indeed.
And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us, wonderful people that you are, including Ria, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. You are very welcome in supporting us, and we hugely appreciate it. That's all three of us. And a big thank you to everyone who's left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you all are Alan Kirkman, Bob Walsh, Richard Skelton, Andrew Seddon, John Kirkman, Keith Grafton, Norfolk and Good, said he, speaking carefully, Graham Whitley, Alistair Rutledge, Chris Exley, and Peter Curtis. And we really do appreciate so many of you leaving us those super thanks. They do help a lot. So thank you very much indeed from all three of us.
Absolutely. And thanks to all our members, to whom we're extremely grateful for your ongoing support. Becoming a member really helps us do what we do and keep going. Of course, you can get some deals like money off a ticket to a RIA party. So do have a look at joining and seeing how you can support us further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. It's got to be an HS2 story to kick us off this week, thanks to John Kirkman for sending us this one. The first HS2 rail tunnel breakthrough has been completed in Birmingham. Tunnel boring machine TBM Mary Ann completed the first excavation of the 3.5 mile Bromford tunnel, which connects Warwickshire and Birmingham. When finished, it will be the longest railway tunnel ever built in the West Midlands. Starting from the Warwickshire village of Water Orton, it ends in the Birmingham suburb of Washwood Heath. Some numbers for you, Richard. We always enjoy these. 10,000 people and 400 businesses in the region are delivering the project, and Marianne, the TBM, excavated around 1 million tonnes of spoil during the tunnel drive. And where did it all go?
Well, I don't know, but it definitely has to go somewhere, didn't it? Right, this story is I don't know, it's maybe the mainstream media maybe being a bit mischievous.
It is.
Well, thanks to Jim Millington and Sean Morris Armitage, amongst others, for alerting us to this. So it was reported in the Daily Telegraph that Network Rail bosses spend £10,000 a week on plane tickets within Britain. But then just below, it actually said, the article says the total cost of internal flights came to £136,000 in 2024. The rest are international flights, which they do for a variety of reasons, including their commercial arm, which is Network Rail Consulting. Anyway, simple maths suggests 136,000 divided by 52 is not 10,000, but 2,615. So not quite as dramatic. Anyway, Network Rail said this: our first choice of travel is always rail, with 99%. That's over 400,000 work trips made by rail, including most journeys between London and Glasgow. On the occasions our employees do fly, it's usually due to time constraints or to avoid overnight expenses such as hotels, or for overseas journeys made by our international consulting arm, Network Rail Consulting. I've got a bit of sympathy with Network Rail on this. It's not so bad if you're looking at London, Edinburgh, London, Glasgow by train, but in our very London-centric radiating network. But if you want to go somewhere like, I don't know, Edinburgh to Bristol, I had a look at that. It's a 1 hour 15 flight. I know you've got to get to the airport and check in all the rest of it. That's not straightforward. But you probably don't have to do an overnight stay. But if you want to go by train, the 807 from Edinburgh doesn't get to Bristol till 14:32. So you've kind of taken up most of the day, and then you've probably got an overnight, and that's a cost. It might even have 2 nights. I don't know. So, look, I do have a bit of sympathy with them. They've said, Network Rail say, no domestic air travel was booked as business or first in 2021, 2022, 2023 or 2024. And actually air travel was over 20% down on last year, with rail up 30%. So bit of a story about nothing. Not sure.
Absolute non-story. I mean, Steph would probably nod at this one, but we dealt with this story, exactly this story, probably 3 times in the last few years. Maybe it was a slow news day. The other one they reach for on those occasions is the headline cost of a Manchester Euston ticket.
Yeah. Anyway, there we go. So...
Right, thanks to David Redgewell and John Kirkman for this one. It's been confirmed that Greater Anglia will be nationalised in terms of operations from October the 12th this year. The operator has said, quote, we are committed to ensuring a smooth transition to public ownership and have both the plans and expertise in place to deliver this outcome. Few interesting things to note, Richard. GA has been the UK's most punctual train operator for the last 2 years.
Is that right?
Since 2021, the TOC has invested £2 billion to upgrade its services, including introducing a new fleet of trains, which means that the new government operator has got a grand legacy, has it not?
Yep. No, it's been a success story. So
it's for the DFT to screw up then.
Oh, come on. Let's be a bit more positive. Hopefully the same people, Martin and his team will be running it post the event. So as long as they're allowed to get on and do it.
Of course, but you recognise the point I'm making.
I do recognise the point. All right. Interesting story sent to us by John Dunford here. A Swiss tech startup has developed solar panels designed specifically for installation between the railway tracks. They're apparently easy to install and remove for track maintenance. And the first 100-metre pilot installation of 48 panels has been deployed along a railway line in western Switzerland. Trackside solar has been tried in other countries, but the company behind this new plan, they're called Sunways, says its modular design is different, and the fact the specialised machine can install 1,000 square metres of panels a day.
Wow.
They've calculated that Sunderland, heavens above, right? Sunways is the name, right? Not having a good day, right? They've calculated that Switzerland's 5,320 kilometres of tracks could produce 1 billion kilowatt hours annually, which is 2% of Switzerland's entire consumption and enough to power 300,000 households a year. I don't know what I think about this. It's great. I love innovation, and startups have got to try something and then fail and then work and then fail and whatever until they come up with an idea. I just wonder, Swiss track geometry is very precise. So that, and I imagine if you're installing something like that's got an electrical connection between track, you'd have to be absolutely certain it was insulated from the rails so you didn't, trigger
stray
track
currents,
problems.
Yeah.
And then you'd absolutely have to take it out to ballast to tamp the ballast, because tamping destroys everything, right? So I don't know, but let's see how they get on. Maybe it is something we could give a go.
I think they should persist in it because the technology is marching ahead. As you know, you used to be. I am a narrow boater, and the solar panels for canal boat roofs now are brilliant. They're flexible. You can stick them down. You can walk on them. You could never do that in the past. Yeah. So I think they should keep going at this until they find
innovating
the right location to stick your panels. Now, a few green signallers, including Steve Roberts and Darren Chilvers, sent this one our way, which is also relating to Switzerland, not Sunderland, Richard. A new UK to Switzerland high-speed train working group is going to be established, apparently. It will bring together British and Swiss government and rail industry experts to look at how to overcome the technical barriers to launching a direct high-speed rail service between the two countries. Hooray. A memorandum of understanding was signed at St Pancras on May the 8th by Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander and Swiss Federal Councillor and Head of the Federal Department of the Environment, Transport, Energy and Communications, Albert Rosti. It's anticipated that a direct service could launch in 5 to 10 years. Oh, that's a long.
And it is... Yeah, it is a long time, but when you think about the things we were talking about recently with all the Eurostar challenges and everything that's got to be done, I saw this story, I thought, well, great, but it's all part of that, isn't it?
But it still seems 10 years seems 5 sounds enough, and 10 sounds anyway. We'll wait and see, won't we? We're theoretically.
Go on, keep going, Grumpy Nige. Go on.
I've started, so I'll finish. Right. And that's this week's Railway News Roundup. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, big, small, national, local, please get them off to us. We can't read them all out, but if we use yours, we'll attach your name to it. We can miss stuff that goes under our radar, so please don't assume we've heard of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that means it's now time to do the quiz. Yeah, no.
I nearly did a fanfare then.
Yeah, I know you nearly did. No, you nearly regressed. Anyway, right. The question last week was this: on which former railway line could I find Buggles Kelly? Buggles Kelly was, of course, the fictional Northern Ireland railway station in the 1937 Will Hay classic comedy, Oh, Mr. Porter, the location for which was the by then closed Clidston, I presume that's how you pronounce it, Clidston station on the Basingstoke to Alton Railway. So if you said Clidston on the Basingstoke to Alton Railway or any sort of combination thereof, that was correct. So we put the many correct answers into a pot, and the winner is Alex Hellier. So Alex, well done. If you send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org, we will get your mug sent off to you.
A bit of a sort of factoid about that one, Richard.
Go on.
The opening scene of Oh, Mr. Porter has got a brief but lovely shot of Pioneer A4 Silver Link, which was then only 2 years old, of course. It's not much of a shot, but it's there and worth watching.
Ah, there you go. It is quite a good film. It's quite a good film. So yeah. It's anyway, won't spoil it. But it's worth a watch. Right, to this week's quiz. Hopefully, also a fairly easy one. But it's this: where on Britain's railway might Batman have lived?
Oh yes.
Right. Bingo. There we go. Right. If you think you know. Answers to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, May the 17th, after which we'll put all the correct answers in a hat, select a winner at random to receive one of our highly prized Green Signals quiz winners mugs.
How on earth did you come up with that one?
I don't know. I don't know. The things that go on in here, it's a bit weird, but there you go.
And now to a bit of fun news. A Lego replica of the Forth Bridge, complete with LNER zoomers, was on display at the Edinburgh Lego Model Show in Edinburgh last weekend. A 26-foot long, 100,000 brick replica of the bridge was star of the show. It was built by Lego Northern UK Railway, which is the UK's largest Lego train club. Probably not your most favourite structure to model, Richard, but hopefully you can appreciate it nonetheless. And they do say that one of the most painful things you can ever do is stand barefoot on a Lego brick, isn't it?
Absolutely no. But even I think, could cope with the height, the height issues of a model. Amazing though, isn't it? 26 feet long. Wow.
But 100,000 bricks.
I know.
I mean, I had a Lego and I was constantly disappointed that the few bricks I had in my box would never make the pictures on the leaflets that came with it.
Very good.
And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. So thanks so much for watching or listening, as usual. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. It absolutely helps us. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon. But most importantly, join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. So we'll see you then, hopefully. But for now, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a fantastic week.